By the end of World War I, the Ottoman Empire, once a dominant power stretching across Europe, Asia, and Africa, was reduced to a shadow of its former self. Military defeat had devastated its forces, territorial losses had eroded its influence, and political structures that had sustained 6 centuries of rule were crumbling. The war, which leaders had hoped would restore prestige and preserve the empire, instead accelerated its collapse. The Ottoman state found itself at a breaking point, unable to continue in its old imperial form. The conflict had exposed the fragility of the empire in every aspect. On the battlefield, Ottoman troops had fought on multiple fronts with varying degrees of success, yet the strain of sustained warfare was overwhelming. From the Caucasus to Mesopotamia, from the Dardanelles to Palestine, armies faced shortages of equipment, insufficient supplies, and inadequate medical support. Soldiers were often exhausted, underpaid, and demoralized, yet expected to hold vast stretches of territory against better-equipped adversaries. Each defeat not only diminished military capacity, but also undermined public confidence in the leadership and in the empire itself. The political system, already weakened by years of reform and internal unrest, struggled to respond to the demands of total war. The Sultanate, though formally the seat of power, had become largely symbolic, with real decision-making concentrated in a narrow leadership circle dominated by the Young Turks. Their initial promise of constitutional governance and modernization had given way to centralized authority and suppression of dissent, leaving little room for alternative voices or flexible strategies. In the context of global conflict, this rigid political structure proved incapable of managing the pressures of occupation, rebellion, and economic collapse. Economic exhaustion compounded these problems. Wartime mobilization disrupted trade, agriculture, and industry, leading to widespread shortages of food, fuel, and essential goods. Inflation skyrocketed, purchasing power fell, and urban populations suffered from hunger and disease. Rural areas, which had once formed the backbone of the empire's economy, were heavily taxed and conscripted, leaving fields uncultivated and communities destabilized. The result was a society in which survival often took precedence over loyalty to the state, and where popular discontent threatened to erupt into open revolt. Ethnic and regional tensions, long managed through the empire's millet system, intensified under the pressures of war. Arab provinces, particularly in the Levant and Mesopotamia, increasingly rejected Ottoman authority. Nationalist movements gained momentum, encouraged by promises of independence from European powers seeking to divide Ottoman territory. Armenians, Kurds, and other minority groups faced both internal pressure and external manipulation, creating an environment of distrust and violence that further destabilized the state. The empire, which had once balanced diversity with imperial oversight, now struggled to maintain cohesion as its legitimacy eroded. The Armistice of 1918 formalized the empire's defeat and marked the beginning of a new phase of vulnerability. Allied forces occupied key cities, including the capital, and proposed agreements to partition remaining territories. These arrangements threatened to dismantle the Ottoman state entirely, leaving only Anatolia under nominal control. For many within the empire, the prospect of foreign domination underscored the impossibility of continuing in the old imperial form. The Sultan and his government appeared powerless to resist, further eroding public confidence and encouraging nationalist movements to assert themselves independently. The social impact of the empire's collapse was profound. Soldiers returning from war found devastated communities and limited economic opportunities. Families were displaced, infrastructure destroyed, and social services non-existent. The psychological toll of defeat, combined with years of political repression and economic hardship, created a climate of uncertainty and anxiety. In this environment, new leaders and ideologies found fertile ground, as populations sought solutions to the failures of imperial governance. It was against this backdrop that Mustafa Kemal emerged as a decisive figure. Rejecting both foreign occupation and the Sultanate's weakened authority, he organized a nationalist resistance in Anatolia. Unlike previous Ottoman leaders, he did not aim to restore the empire in its old form, but to establish a sovereign nation-state capable of surviving in a modern world. The success of this movement highlighted the contrast between the old imperial order, which had failed to adapt, and a new vision based on national sovereignty, military effectiveness, and secular governance. The empire's final years revealed a stark truth. Centuries of political and territorial dominance could not withstand the combined pressures of modern warfare, economic crisis, internal dissent, and foreign intervention. The old systems of administration, reliant on hierarchical loyalty and religious authority, were ill-suited to the challenges of a world increasingly defined by nationalism, industrialization, and global power politics. By 1922, the Sultanate was abolished, and the Ottoman Empire ceased to exist as a sovereign entity. Yet the legacy of the empire persisted in profound ways. Its legal codes, administrative structures, and cultural institutions influenced the new Turkish state and neighboring regions. Former territories of the empire, now independent or under foreign control, carried with them the imprint of Ottoman governance and identity. While the empire itself could no longer survive, its historical, social, and political impact continued to shape the Middle East and Southeastern Europe for decades to come. The story of the Ottoman Empire at its breaking point is one of cumulative pressures rather than a single catastrophic event. Military defeat exposed structural weaknesses, political rigidity prevented effective adaptation, economic exhaustion undermined popular support, and social and ethnic tensions eroded cohesion. The empire's decline was not inevitable in a moment, but was accelerated by the unprecedented scale and complexity of World War I. The combination of these factors demonstrated that survival required transformation rather than preservation, a lesson that would inform the creation of the Republic of Turkey and the redrawing of the regional map. In the end, the Ottoman Empire's final years illustrate the limits of imperial endurance in the modern era. Once a center of power commanding vast territories and diverse populations, it could no longer sustain its old systems of governance in a world transformed by war, nationalism, and foreign intervention. By the early 1920s, the empire had passed its breaking point, and the foundations of a new political order were laid. The transition from imperial collapse to republican nationhood marked both the conclusion of a 6-century-old dynasty and the beginning of a modern state navigating the challenges of the 20th century. The collapse of the Ottoman Empire was a story of accumulated strain, highlighting how military failure, political exhaustion, social unrest, and external pressure converged to dismantle one of history's longest-lasting empires. It underscores that the end of an empire is rarely sudden, but rather a process in which every internal weakness is magnified by external challenges. For the peoples of the former Ottoman lands, these years were transformative, setting the stage for new national identities, borders, and governments that would define the region for generations to come.